How did a decades-long series of court battles over a trash dump result in one of the most stunning neighborhoods in all of San Francisco? Rows of iconic Victorian and Edwardian homes lining tree-lined cul-de-sacs leading to one of San Francisco's most renowned park spaces, each within walking distance of so many great food and nightlife scenes with A-plus weather and easy transit access. This is Austin Clark, your lawyer turned real estate agent in San Francisco, and the Duboce Park Historic District is one of those neighborhoods that most people outside of San Francisco have never even heard of, but it's, in my view, one of the most aesthetically pure residential enclaves we have in the city. 87 homes, all constructed within just a few years of each other by basically two people, all resulting from one of the strangest legal disputes in the city's history. I'm going to break down the whole story in this video, the history, the architecture, what the lifestyle is like living there, and how much homes cost in what has become one of the most desirable neighborhoods in all of San Francisco. So let's get right to it and start with the historic district's origin story, which is genuinely wild. The Duboce Park Historic District is the official landmark designation for a three-block residential enclave on what are now known as Carmelita, Pierce, and Potomac Streets, right on the northern edge of Duboce Park in the Duboce Triangle neighborhood. And to understand why this neighborhood looks the way it does, you have to go all the way back to the 1850s. In 1856, the city of San Francisco designated this particular block of land bound by Duboce, Scott, Waller, and Steiner as a public reservation. The idea was that it would eventually become a public park similar to other reservations that were designated by the city like Alamo Square and Lafayette Square. But there was a big problem. For about 40 years, nobody could agree on who actually owned the land. Squatters claimed ownership to portions of the land throughout the 19th century. Portions of the land were granted by courts to various citizens over objection from the city. The city at one point had changed the land designation to a hospital site, leased it to the San Francisco Female Hospital, except no hospital was ever built there. And over time, what had become colloquially known as the hospital lot had become occupied by a collection of stables, temporary boarding houses that served as lodging for laborers, and with people purportedly infected with infectious diseases. At the same time, a massive excavation project was taking place nearby on 14th Street, and the entire site was being used as a dumping ground for all the rubble that it was creating, and it was creating piles and piles of rock many feet high. All of this became such a nuisance that neighbors joined forces, creating the Hospital Lot Improvement Club, and petitioned the city government, the Department of Public Health, to shut down the area. By then, through a series of land transfers, the German Savings and Loan Association, a bank, had claimed to have taken ownership of a portion of the land and actually sued San Francisco for title. And finally, in 1896, after decades of court battles, the city ultimately relinquished title to a portion of the land to the bank. The German Savings and Loan Association now definitively held title to the land, and in July of 1897, they deeded interior streets that were created to the city. They extended Pierce Street south of Waller and created two brand new dead-end streets that they called Primrose and Daisy, which we now know as Carmelita and Potomac. So they basically ran three cul-de-sacs straight into the edge of what would become Duboce Park. And that decision is why, to this day, houses on Carmelita, Pierce, and Potomac dead-end directly on the park. There's no separation between these houses and the grass. No streets, no sidewalk, just your houses and the park. There's no other block arrangement quite like this in San Francisco. So the streets belong to the city, and the German Savings and Loan Association sold off private lots to developers who went on to build some of the most gorgeous homes that we have in San Francisco today. And the rubble that had been dumped there from the 14th Street excavation project was actually used to build some of the stone walls and some of the foundations of these houses. The park itself was formally dedicated on September 9th, 1900. It was named after Colonel Victor Duboce, a veteran of the Spanish-American War, who had advocated for converting the old hospital reservation into public green space. And within a couple of years, the rubble had been redistributed, soil laid, grass planted, paths cut through the space, and it became a classic Victorian era pleasure garden. And luckily for that neighborhood, when the 1906 earthquake and fires hit, that area was largely unscathed relative to other areas in San Francisco, and it's why a lot of the houses that are still there had survived the earthquake. Because of all that history and the incredible homes and the park that were built there, which I'm going to take you through later in this video, the area was designated an historic district under Article 10 of the Planning Code. And now that I've gone through that history, I want to get into more about the homes that were built there and the lifestyle in the neighborhood. But before I get there, if you could do me a huge favor, if you like videos about San Francisco neighborhoods, lifestyle, current events, new developments, or all things San Francisco real estate, subscribe to my channel because I make videos about that stuff every single week. And if you're thinking about buying or selling a place in San Francisco and want to understand how all the changes we're seeing across the city are impacting our local real estate market, reach out to me. I was a lawyer at one of the biggest law firms in the world before getting into real estate. I've helped numerous people relocate here from all over the country. Happy to be a resource for you. I'll put my contact info in the description below. Reach out anytime. Now back to the Duboce Park Historic District, and I'm going to get into the architecture because it's what makes these streets genuinely special. What you're looking at when you walk these streets is the result of an almost impossibly compressed period of construction. Nearly 2/3 of the buildings in this district were built in just 2 years between 1899 and 1900, and because they were built so quickly, by so few builders, working off so few floor plans, the streets have a consistency and a coherence you almost never see in San Francisco neighborhoods where development typically happened piecemeal over several decades. The dominant architectural style in the neighborhood is Queen Anne. It's why you see so many asymmetrical facades and very steep pitched roofs, and some houses with turret-style front-facing elements. You see wood spindle porches and very intricate millwork all over the buildings. These were constructed during the peak era of redwood millwork in San Francisco. The mills were producing a very large variety of millwork decorative elements for houses, and these builders who built in this neighborhood were taking advantage of basically every single product that was available. The majority of buildings on Carmelita and Pierce were designed and built by a guy named Fernando Nelson. Over a 77-year career, he built over 4,000 homes in San Francisco alone, and the Duboce Park Historic District was one of his very first assignments. On Potomac, most of the homes were built by George Moore and Charles Ollinger, a carpenter and a lumber supplier who worked in partnership. And the social history of the neighborhood is just as layered as the architecture. The first residents in the late 1890s and early 1900s were solidly middle class, people like shipwrights and clerks, insurance agents, tailors, people who could afford to buy into a new development close to the cable car lines, and the builders themselves lived there alongside their buyers. After the 1906 earthquake and the tent camp period, the neighborhood really densified and changed character. By the 1940s and 50s, defense workers had flooded the city during World War II. A large number of African-American families also moved into nearby Western Addition. Then in the 1960s, as the San Francisco Redevelopment Agency displaced thousands of people from the Western Addition through urban renewal projects, which is one of the more painful chapters in the city's history, many of those families moved into the Duboce area. By the late 1970s, the demographics were shifting again. The Castro was emerging as a center for the gay community, and new residents were also moving into Duboce. And it's that community that's widely credited with restoring a lot of the Victorian architecture that we see there today. The neighborhood is still evolving. It's very diverse. It's very community-oriented. There's a very strong neighborhood association that is very energetic about maintaining historical integrity of these buildings and improving the park. And the lifestyle in the neighborhood is near unmatched in San Francisco, rivaling some of the most sought-after, more well-known neighborhoods. Duboce Triangle has a walk score of 98, a bike score of 89, and a transit score of 93. Exceptional numbers, even by SF standards. And what that translates to in practice is that most people who live there can genuinely get by day to day without a car. Duboce Park is the epicenter of the neighborhood. Off-leash dogs, a lawn filled with picnickers, people reading whenever the fog clears, tennis courts, a playground area, Harvey Milk Recreation Center at the western edge that offers classes, programs. It's one of the oldest community dark rooms, if not the oldest community dark room, still open to the public in San Francisco. The Muni Sunset Tunnel portal is right at the edge of the park. There's a robust cafe and coffee shop culture on Duboce and on Waller Streets. The area is just a few blocks from Castro, Lower Haight, and Hayes Valley, so your nightlife and dining radius is actually quite expansive, well beyond just the boundaries of the neighborhood itself. It's definitely not a neighborhood that you feel limited by the areas immediately surrounding you. And you can actually go outside and access this stuff relatively easily because the weather in the area is pretty pleasant by San Francisco standards. You're right in the middle of the city. You're not in the fog belt. You're not in the sun zone. You're right in the middle in that moderate weather zone. And as I hinted at before, you really don't need a car if you live here. Depending on where you work, of course, there are many Muni lines that run through or underneath the area. The N, the J, the K, the L, the M, the T, all of those lines nearby. You can get to the Castro in minutes. You could be in Soma in 10 minutes. You could be at the Ferry Building in 15 minutes, and you're within reach of BART and Caltrain. The Wiggle also runs directly through the neighborhood. The Wiggle is a famous low gradient bike route that traces a path from the Embarcadero all the way to Golden Gate Park, avoiding the hills that make most of San Francisco cycling pretty challenging. And when you combine that with Market Street's protected infrastructure for cyclists, it's one of the best biking infrastructures we have in the entire city. And if you do own a car, it's still really convenient because the entry to the 101 is close by. You have Market Street nearby as well that connects you to many other locations in the city. And the area is just centrally located in San Francisco, so it's a quick trip north, south, east, or west. It's all about convenience and easy access, whether you're doing it by foot, by bike, by car, by transit. All right, all of this sounds amazing, and you're probably thinking to yourself, with all the walkability and the good weather and the food and nightlife and the incredible architecture and the incredible history, homes here are probably expensive, and you're not wrong. The most recent home that sold was 50 Carmelita, a 4-bed, 4.5 bath Queen Anne Victorian, built in 1899 that had been completely remodeled. It was at the very edge of the cul-de-sac, right on the park. It was listed for $5.8 million and traded for $7.3 million in June of 2026, so about $1,900 a foot. Another house on Carmelita traded in January of 2026. That was 65 Carmelita. It needed a little more updating and wasn't right on the park's edge, so it was a little less expensive. It was listed for $4.4 million, traded for $5.65 million, about $1,640 a foot, which is very expensive for a property that hadn't been renovated in some time. And both of those properties sold in a week or less. So when these things come to market, because there are so few of them, remember there's only 87 in the entire district, very few come to market. When they do, there's a lot of competition and things move quickly. And aside from the astronomical prices and stiff competition, there are some other downsides you need to be aware of living in an historic district. And that's really stemming from the historic designation. The designation significantly limits what you can do to the home once you own it. Principally limits to what you can change on the exterior of the home, and also limits that increase the cost of any renovations. For example, if you're trying to replace doors, windows, kind of exterior front-facing elements, you have to do it in a way that matches the historic character. That means everything is custom. The intricate millwork that you see, you have to replace it in the exact same way. The windows, you have to custom order them exactly to the openings and the shape that they exist. Same with the doors. It is extremely difficult, if not impossible, under these historic designation rules to add a garage or expand a garage or add windows or change where the doors are. A lot of these homes have very steep pitched roofs, and sometimes buyers want to, or owners want to, expand the roof line to add more headroom, make it a little bit more usable on the upper floors. They want to add dormers to do that, but you're not allowed to do that if it would alter the way that the house looks from the front of the house, from the exterior front-facing facade. And setting aside the regulations, if you try to do any of these things, you're probably going to get pushback from neighbors who are trying to preserve historic character in the neighborhood. But on the flip side, there are some benefits. For example, a lot of these houses would be eligible for Mills Act protection. This basically lets owners pay lower property taxes in exchange for agreements to maintain the historic integrity of their properties. The Mills Act could save tens of thousands of dollars a year on property taxes, so there are some plus sides and some downsides to living in an historic home in an historic district. If you're thinking about buying or selling in an historic district like Duboce Park or in any other neighborhood in San Francisco and want to understand how all the changes we're seeing are impacting our local real estate market, reach out to me. I've lived here for almost 14 years. I've helped numerous people relocate here from all over the country. Happy to be a resource for you. I'll put my contact info in the description below. Reach out anytime. And if you like videos about San Francisco neighborhoods, lifestyle, current events, new developments, or all things San Francisco history and real estate, subscribe to my channel because I make videos about that stuff every single week. And if you want to understand what's going on in our luxury housing market as a result of the AI boom, return to office, and the changing city conditions that we're experiencing right now, we've got a separate video on just that. I'll link that in the description below as well. Go check it out. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one.